If he hadn't come along just then, well, he didn't want to think about it. When Trigger finally calmed down, Evan examined the collar. "What made this collar shrink like that, boy?" he asked Trigger. The dog had walked over to the fence and was frantically slurping water from his bowl. This is plain weird, Evan thought. The collar couldn't have shrunk. It's made of leather. There was no reason for it to shrink. Then why did it suddenly start choking Trigger? Evan turned to Trigger, studying him as the dog lapped greedily at the water, breathing hard. He turned and glanced back at Evan for a second, then returned to his frantic water slurping. He's bigger, Evan decided. He's definitely bigger. But Trigger was 12 years old, 84 in human years, older than Aunt Catherine. Trigger was too old for a late growth spurt. It must be my eyes, Evan decided, tossing the collar to the ground. This place must be making me see things. Catherine was at the kitchen door, calling Evan to lunch. He poured out a bowl of dry food, shouted goodbye to Trigger, who didn't look up from the water dish, and hurried to the house. The next morning, an overcast morning with an autumn chill in the air, Evan made his way to Andy's house. He found her huddled under a big maple tree in the neighbor's front yard. "What's going on?" he called. Then he saw that she was leaning over something, her hands working quickly. "Come help me!" she cried, not looking up. Evan came jogging over. "Whoa!" he cried out when he saw that Andy was struggling to free a calico cat that had been tied to the tree trunk. The cat screeched and swiped its paw at Andy. Andy dodged the claws and continued to pull at the big knots in the rope. "The Bamer twins did this. I know it," she said loudly, over the shrilly protesting cat. "This poor cat was probably tied up here all night." The cat, in a panic, shrieked with amazingly human-sounding cries. "Stand still, cat," Evan said as the terrified cat swiped its claws at Andy again. "Can I help?" "No, I've almost got it," she replied, tugging at the knot. "I'd like to tie Rick and Tony to this tree." "Poor frightened cat," Evan said quietly. "There," Andy said triumphantly, pulling the rope loose. The cat gave one last cry of protest, its tail standing straight up. Then it darted away, running at full speed, and disappeared under a tall hedge without looking back. "Not very polite," Evan muttered. Andy stood up and sighed. She was wearing faded denim jeans and a pale green oversized t-shirt that came down nearly to her knees. She lifted the bottom of the shirt to examine a hole the cat managed to snag in it. "I can't believe those two creeps," she said, shaking her head. "Maybe we should call the police, or the ASPCA or something," Evan suggested. "The twins would just deny it," Andy said glumly, shaking her head. Then she added, "And the cat's not a very good witness." They both laughed. Evan led the way back to his aunt's house. All the way back, they talked about how they'd like to teach the Bamer twins a lesson, but neither of them had any good ideas. They found Catherine concentrating on a jigsaw puzzle at the dining room table. She looked up when they entered, squinting at them. "You like jigsaw puzzles? I like to keep my mind active, you know. That's why I like puzzles. Your mind can get flabby when you get to be my age. 112. She slapped the table gleefully at her own wit. Evan and Andy both flashed her agreeable smiles. Then she returned to her puzzle without waiting for a reply. "She's going to drive me bananas," Evan exclaimed. "Evan, she'll hear you," Andy protested, cupping a hand over his mouth. I told you she's completely deaf. She can't hear me. She doesn't want to hear anyone. She hates everyone. I think she's sweet, Andy said. Why does she wear a bone around her neck? Probably thinks it's cool, Evan cracked. Let's go upstairs, Andy urged, pushing him toward the stairs. I still feel weird talking about your aunt right in front of her. You're a crazy old coot, Evan called to Catherine, a big smile on his face. Catherine looked up from her puzzle pieces to cast a cold stare his way. She heard you, Andy cried, horrified. Don't be dumb, Evan said, and started up the stairs, nearly tripping over Sarah Beth. Up in Evan's room, Andy paced uncomfortably. What do you want to do? Well, we could read some of these great books, Evan said sarcastically, pointing to the dusty old books that lined the walls. Maybe find a spell to cast on the Boehmer twins. You know, turn them into newts. Forget about newts, Andy said dryly. Hey, where's the monster blood? Before Evan could answer, she spotted it on one of the shelves. They raced across the room for it. Andy got there first and grabbed the can. Evan, look, she said, her eyes growing wide with surprise. What's going on? She held up the can. The green gunk had pushed up the lid and was flowing out of the can. Chapter 12. Huh? Did the top break or something? Evan asked. He took the can from her and examined it. Sure enough, the lid had popped off. The gooey green substance was pushing up out of the can. Evan pulled out a handful of the green gunk. Weird, he exclaimed. It's expanding, he said, squeezing it in his hand. It's definitely growing. I guess so, Andy exclaimed. It grew right out of the can. Hey, it's not cold anymore, Evan said. He balled it up and tossed it to Andy. It's really warm, she agreed. Weird. She tried to toss it back to him, but it stuck to her palm. It's getting sticky, she reported. Are you sure this is the same stuff? Of course, Evan replied. But it wasn't sticky before, remember? She said. He pulled another warm hunk of it from the can. I guess it just changes after the can has been opened. He squeezed the stuff into a ball shape and tossed it to the floor. Look, it stuck to the floor. It didn't bounce. Weird, Andy repeated. Maybe I should throw it in the trash, Evan said, prying the sticky glob from the floor. I mean, what good is it if it doesn't bounce? Hey, no way, Andy said. We've got to see what it does next. A soft mewing sound made them both turn toward the door. Evan was surprised to see Sarah Beth standing there, her head cocked, her yellow eyes staring at him. Or was she staring at the glob of monster blood in his hand? That cat looks so intelligent, Andy said. It's as stupid as every other cat, Evan muttered. Look, she wants to play ball with the monster blood. Sorry, cat, Andy said. It doesn't bounce. As if she understood, Sarah Beth mewed unhappily, turned, and padded silently from the room. Now where am I going to keep this stuff? Evan asked. It's too big for its can. Here, how about this? Andy asked. She reached down to a low shelf and came up with an empty coffee can. Yeah, okay. Evan tossed his hunk into the coffee can. Andy squeezed hers into a flat pancake. Look, It isn't glowing the way it used to either, she said, holding the pancake up for Evan to see. But it sure is warm, almost hot.
It's alive!
Evan screamed playfully.
Run for your life! It's alive!
Andy laughed and began to chase Evan, menacing him with the flat green pancake. Come get your monster blood! Come and get it! He dodged away, then grabbed it from her hand. He squeezed it together, balling it up in one hand, then tossed it into the coffee can. They both peered into the can. The green substance filled it up a little more than halfway. Go ahead, taste it, Andy urged, poking the can in his face. I dare you. Huh? No way. I double dare you, Evan said, pushing the coffee can back to her. Double darers have to go first, Andy insisted, grinning. Go ahead, taste it. Evan made a disgusted face and shook his head. Then he grabbed a big hunk of it and heaved it at Andy. Laughing, she picked it up off the carpet and tossed it at his face. She threw high and the green glob stuck to the wall. Evan reached for another hunk. They had a messy, hilarious monster blood battle until dinner time. Then, as they tried to clean up, they both heard Trigger through the open window. He was barking loudly out in his pen. Evan reached the window first. The sky was still gray and overcast. Trigger was leaning on the wooden fence, standing on his hind legs, barking his head off. Whoa, Trigger, Evan called out. Chill out. Hey, what's with Trigger? Andy asked. Is your dog still growing? He looks so big. Evan's mouth dropped open, and he uttered a silent gasp, realizing that Andy was right. Trigger had nearly doubled in size. Chapter 13.
Trigger! Come back! Come back!
The big dog continued to run, its giant paws thundering against the concrete.
Come back!
Evan screamed, running with long, desperate strides, his heart thudding, his legs aching with each step as he tried to catch up with the galloping dog. The night was dark and starless. The street glistened as if it had recently rained. Trigger's paws hit the pavement, each step a loud thunderclap that seemed to echo forever. His giant ears flapped like wings, twin pennants caught on the wind. His big head bobbed up and down, but he didn't look back.
Trigger! Trigger!
Evan's voice seemed muffled by the gusting wind pushed back in his face. He tried shouting louder, but no sound came out at all. He knew he had to stop the dog from running away. He had to catch the dog and then get help. Trigger was growing so fast, completely out of control. He was already the size of a pony and getting larger by the minute.
Trigger! Trigger! Stop, boy!
Trigger didn't seem to hear him. Evan's voice didn't seem to carry beyond the gusting, swirling wind. And still Evan ran, his chest pounding every